We are Ghost Squad. It sounds dramatic, almost like the title of a cheap action movie. But behind that name lay a grim reality. An elite unit, assembled from the best, tasked with missions they don't write about in newspapers or report on the evening news. Missions where the price of failure isn't a reprimand or demotion, but a nameless grave in foreign soil. We were thrown into the thick of it, where regular army units either couldn't handle it or their presence was undesirable, and we delivered. Until today. The alarm wailed in the middle of the night, tearing me from a short, restless sleep. Not the kind of sleep where you dream of home or family, but the kind where you replay past operations over and over, looking for mistakes, remembering the faces of those we couldn't save. The signal wasn't a drill, sharp, insistent, deafening. Within 5 minutes, we were standing in full gear in the hangar, listening to Doc's briefing, short as a gunshot. His face, usually unreadable, was strained today, an unusual line etched in the corners of his mouth. "Gentlemen, this is an emergency," Doc's voice cut through the hangar's silence. 2 hours ago, contact was lost with a Globemaster transport plane, tail number 734. According to our intelligence, heavily armed bandit groups are active in that area. There are serious grounds to believe they are behind the loss of the Globemaster, possibly using Russian-made Manpad's Igla or Strela type. On board was experimental cargo code named Chimera. The cargo's purpose is a top state secret. We were only told it's something capable of fundamentally altering the balance of power. Perhaps a new energy source, perhaps an artifact of unknown origin. Any information leak about this cargo could have catastrophic consequences. Doc paused, his heavy gaze sweeping over us. A suffocating silence hung in the hangar, broken only by the steady hum of ventilation. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the stuffy air. Chimera. Even the name sounded ominous, like something alien. Unnatural. The Globemaster last made contact over the Rub al-Khali Desert, the commander continued, pointing to a massive map spread out on the hood of one of our Humvees. The empty quarter. One of the most barren and least explored places on the planet. Endless sands, extreme temperatures, a complete lack of water and life. The plane disappeared from radar suddenly. Search satellites detected a probable crash site, but the data is fragmented, possibly due to strong magnetic anomalies in the area. Magnetic anomalies. That phrase always gave me a bad feeling. It meant problems with communication, navigation, any electronics. In desert conditions, that could be a death sentence. Our task, Doc's voice rose, emphasizing every word, is to find the Globemaster. Evacuate the Chimera cargo at any cost. If possible, survivors. Though the chances, as you understand, are minimal. Due to the threat of hostile air defense, direct approach to the crash site is impossible. You will be dropped at a safe distance. Your group is reconnaissance and rapid response. Conduct a recon, assess the situation, and if possible, secure a perimeter until the main forces arrive. But they are still far away. So for the next few hours, you'll have to rely only on yourselves. Departure in 30 minutes. Questions? Thunder scoffed, shrugging his shoulders under the weight of his trusty M240. Going into another hellhole for the brass's toys again. What kind of chimera is it that ended up in such a remote place? None of our business, Thunder. Doc cut him off. Our business is to follow orders. Sparky, double-check all equipment. Pay special attention to electromagnetic pulse protection and life support systems. Reaper will need your eyes more than ever. Whisper, stick close, keep your eyes peeled. I nodded, feeling my mouth dry up. Rub al-Khali. Even the name sounded like a judgment. A boundless sea of sand, where a person is just a tiny grain that the desert can swallow at any moment, leaving no trace. A premonition of disaster, cold and sticky like a spider web, enveloped me. It was almost tangible, hanging in the hangar air, along with the smell of machine oil and ozone. Loading onto the transport was quick and coordinated. The roar of the engines grew, pressing us into our seats. I looked out the window at the receding base lights, which soon disappeared behind the clouds. Ahead lay the unknown, the desert, the missing plane, and the mysterious chimera. Everything inside me tightened with a bad feeling. I saw I wasn't the only one. Even on Thunder's face, usually radiating composure, a shadow of unease flickered. Reaper silently checked his rifle's optics, his fingers moving with practiced precision, but his gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, as if he already saw what we were yet to see. Sparky mumbled something under his breath, tinkering with a tablet, his forehead glistening with sweat. Doc sat opposite, his eyes closed, but I knew he wasn't sleeping. He was calculating possibilities, preparing for the worst. His calmness always reassured us, but today even it couldn't dispel the fog of anxiety. The flight lasted several hours. During that time, we managed to check our weapons, gear, and discuss possible scenarios again. But the closer we got to the search area, the stronger the feeling of irrational, oppressive dread became. Outside, an endless yellow-orange expanse stretched out, shimmering under the rays of the rising sun. Beautiful, but deadly beautiful. It wasn't the kind of beauty you admire, but the kind that inspires primal fear. The desert breathed ancientness and indifference to human hustle. "Approaching calculated point," the pilot's voice came through the headphones. "Nothing visual yet, descending." I pressed my face to the window. Sands, sands, and more sands. Dunes, like frozen waves of a giant ocean, stretched to the horizon. Not a single sign of life. Not a single hint that a huge plane could have crashed here. But I knew. The desert knows how to keep its secrets and its nightmares. The call of the desert was heard, and we were flying straight into its embrace, not knowing what awaited us. Not knowing that this call could be the last for many of us. There was a lump in my throat. My heart pounded as if it wanted to burst from my chest. I swallowed, trying to quell the tremor in my hands, and gripped my rifle tighter. The premonition of disaster was turning into certainty. This mission would be unlike any before. The ramp of our transport strained open, letting in the scorching, dry desert air. It hit my face like a blast furnace door, instantly drying out my nose and mouth. The sun, already high above the horizon, blinded my eyes, making me squint even through my protective glasses. We stood on the edge of an abyss, ready to step into that yellow, silent inferno. 30 seconds to drop, the loadmaster sergeant roared. Outside temperature 48 Celsius, humidity 0, conserve water. 48. And it was only morning. I felt drops of sweat already rolling down my back under the heavy plate carrier. Each of us carried at least 30 kilograms of gear, weapons, and ammo. In these conditions, it wasn't just a load, but a real test of endurance. "Go!" Doc barked, and one by one we stepped off the ramp onto the scorching sand. Our feet immediately sank slightly. Small stones and dry, prickly bushes of unknown origin crunched underfoot, the only signs of any vegetation in this hell. The transport, without delay, roared its engines and began to climb, leaving us alone in the middle of this endless, hostile world. Its hum quickly faded, and silence descended. A deafening, oppressive silence, the kind you can only hear in dead places. It was so thick, it seemed you could touch it. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, not even the rustle of wind. Only our heavy breathing and the creak of our gear. Looking around, I felt the utter insignificance of man before this element. In all directions, as far as the eye could see, stretched dunes. Huge, majestic, they created the illusion of a frozen ocean. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the air into a shimmering haze. It seemed the very air was filled with dust and despair. There was no landmark for my gaze to latch onto, just the yellowness of the sand and the dazzling blue of the sky, and that oppressive, almost physically palpable feeling of an alien hostile presence, as if someone invisible was watching us from behind the dunes, waiting. I shivered despite the heat. It was irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Sparky bearing? Doc's voice was hoarse. Our tech, who had already set up a portable station, leaned over the screen. His face was concentrated, sweat drops gleamed on his forehead. Got a weak signal, Commander. Very weak and intermittent. Looks like the plane's emergency beacon. Azimuth 270, distance about 1.5 miles, 2 miles. Good. Move in a file 10 meters apart. Thunder, front, Reaper, rear, Whisper, look around, stay sharp. Conserve energy and water. Move out. We moved in the indicated direction. Walking on loose sand was difficult. Our feet kept sinking. Every step required effort. The heat became more unbearable. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows grew shorter, denying us even the slightest hint of coolness. Sweat-soaked uniforms stuck unpleasantly to our bodies. I tried to breathe evenly through my nose, but the dry, scorching air burned my lungs. There was a taste of dust in my mouth. The canteen seemed to weigh a ton, but I knew every sip was worth its weight in gold. About an hour into our march, when the sun was already baking the tops of our heads even through our helmets, Thunder, who was in front, stopped and raised a hand. "See something? Looks like wreckage." We approached cautiously. Before us, half buried in sand, lay the tail section of a massive Globemaster transport plane. Its silvery hull was mangled and torn, like a giant sardine can ripped open by an invisible monster. Part of the fuselage went deep into a dune. Another was scattered for hundreds of meters around. The scene was horrific. I couldn't imagine what force could so disfigure a multi-ton machine. Around it lay spent casings from Kalashnikovs, fresh tracks of military boots and wide tire treads, likely from technical pickups. The bandits were gone, but it was clear they had been here very recently. "Scan the perimeter," Doc ordered. "Look for survivors, but be careful. Don't touch anything until I say so." We spread out, examining the crash site. The smell of kerosene and burnt metal hit my nostrils, mixing with the pervasive odor of dust. Debris was scattered over a vast area. I saw pieces of wings, engines ripped out, landing gear sticking out of the sand at unnatural angles. No signs of fire, which was strange. Usually, everything burns in such disasters. "Doc, the cockpit," Reaper reported, his voice strained. "Empty. No bodies, no blood. Just ripped seatbelts and a wrecked instrument panel." This was more than strange. Even assuming the pilots ejected, there should have been signs, but there were none. As if they had simply vanished. I approached the torn-open cargo bay. It had been breached, not by an explosion, not by impact. Neatly, as if by a giant can opener, someone or something had cut out a large section of the hull. Inside gaped emptiness. The special restraints for the Chimera container were broken. The container itself was gone. "The cargo is stolen," Doc stated, his face even darker. "And it looks like those bandits did it. Too clean a job for simple looters. But the pilots, where did they go?" The question hung in the scorching air. We stood amidst this chaos, and the feeling of an alien presence intensified tenfold. Who could breach a plane in such a remote location? And where did the pilots go? Most importantly, where was the Chimera? "Commander." Sparky leaned over his device again. "Strange. The plane's beacon is almost dead, but I'm picking up another signal. Very weak, barely discernible, with strong interference. Looks like a beacon from the Chimera container." "Where from?" Doc asked. "Direction, northeast." He pointed towards where a dark patch was visible on the horizon, looking like a ridge of low rocks or ruins. We all looked in the indicated direction. In the shimmering haze, some unclear outlines were indeed discernible. From this distance, it was hard to tell what it was. "It can't be," Thunder muttered. "According to all maps, there's nothing here. Just sand." "Maps can lie, Thunder," Doc replied, "especially in places like this. If Chimera is there, and the tracks lead there, we go. Sparky, lead the way. The rest, heightened vigilance. I don't like any of this." We left the mangled remains of the Globe Master behind and followed the tracks of the bandits who had obviously taken the Chimera. The weak, distorted signal from the beacon confirmed the direction. The heat became simply unbearable. Every step was difficult. The monotonous landscape was depressing. But we walked, guided by the tracks and the thin thread of the signal, into the unknown. We walked towards the silhouettes darkening on the horizon, which gradually took on clearer outlines. They were indeed ruins. Ancient walls half buried in sand, collapsed columns, gaping black openings of windows and doors. A vast, dead city that was on no map. Majestic and ominous, it rose from the sands like a ghost of a long-forgotten civilization. And the closer we got, the stronger the oppressive feeling that we were intruding on a forbidden place where we were unwelcome. The Chimera beacon signal became slightly stronger, leading us directly into the heart of these cursed ruins. We entered the dead city with the first rays of the afternoon sun, when the heat reached its peak. The air was so hot it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Every breath burned my lungs. The silence of the ruins was almost as oppressive as the desert's stillness, but here it was different, filled with the echoes of long-gone eras, frozen history, and perhaps something else, something darker and more ancient. The ruins were vast. Broken sandstone walls, covered in weathered patterns, soared upwards, lost in the shimmering haze. Wide, once paved streets were covered in sand, but their outlines were still discernible. Half-ruined arches, remnants of colonnades, gaping voids leading into the dark depths of buildings. All this created a picture of majestic desolation. The city was clearly very ancient, perhaps older than the Egyptian pyramids. But who built it? And why was it abandoned and forgotten? "Quite a city," Thunder whistled, looking around. His skepticism seemed to have waned slightly in the face of this silent witness to history. "And not a word about it in any textbook, wonders." "Less talk, more focus," Doc snapped. "Sparky, what about the signal?" "Steadier, Commander. Coming from the central part of the city, about a kilometer from here. But there's something else." Sparky tapped his finger on the screen of his multifunctional detector. Strange readings, a faint but steady radiation background. Not critical, but it's there. And it's also increasing as we approach the Chimera signal source. Radiation. That word made me tense up inside. A mysterious cargo was one thing. An invisible threat capable of killing slowly and painfully was another. Perhaps the Chimera was damaged in the crash and was now hot. Or was the radiation source something else connected to this cursed place? This became an additional incentive to move deeper into the ruins, besides searching for our main objective. We needed to find out the nature of this radiation and its danger level. We moved slowly, examining every structure. The heat was exhausting. The sun was almost directly overhead and the shadows were short, offering no respite. Mirages danced on the scorching sand, distorting the outlines of the ruins, creating bizarre moving shapes at the periphery of my vision. Several times I thought I saw dark silhouettes gliding between the ruins, but when I looked closer, they disappeared, dissolving in the haze. A trick of the imagination, exhausted by heat and tension, or something more. In one of the half-ruined temples or palaces, we came across bas-reliefs. They were severely damaged by time and sand, but what we could make out sent chills down my spine. Carved into the stone slabs were figures of humans with jackal heads, long, muscular bodies, bestial muzzles with sharp fangs. They held curved swords and strange serrated spears in their clawed hands. In the center of one bas-relief was a giant wolf-like creature much larger than the jackal-headed ones. Its eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly fire even in stone, and needle-like teeth jutted from its bared maw. The creature stood on its hind legs, its forelimbs with massive claws raised towards the sky, as if in a ritual gesture. Around it, the jackal-headed figures danced and prostrated themselves. "What the hell is that?" Reaper muttered, usually a man of few words, but now his voice expressed clear disgust and unease. He ran his hand over the rough stone, dusting off the sand. "Looks like some ancient gods, or demons," Doc replied, carefully examining the images. This civilization clearly worshipped something very specific, and by the looks of it, something cruel. The atmosphere of antiquity and desolation became more palpable, infused with some kind of primal horror. These images carried the imprint of something alien to human nature, something that would be better left buried under the sands of eternity. I felt chills again despite the scorching heat. We continued our path, trying not to linger long in open spaces. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red tones. Usually, sunset brings relief, coolness, but here in this dead city, it brought only increased anxiety. Shadows lengthened, turning the ruins into a labyrinth of black voids and distorted silhouettes. And then it began. The sky to the west, crimson just a moment ago, began to darken with unnatural speed. Not like the sky usually darkens before nightfall, but as if something giant had covered the desert with a black shroud. The temperature, scorching moments ago, began to drop sharply. A cold seeped into my bones, making my teeth chatter, and the wind rose. First light, barely noticeable, it quickly grew into a veritable hurricane. Sand lifted from the ground, lashed our faces, got into our eyes, nose, mouth, crunched on our teeth. "Storm!" Doc yelled, his voice cutting through the wind's howl. "Sandstorm! Sparky comms!" "No comms, Commander." Sparky could barely hold on to his equipment, which the wind was trying to rip from his hands. Completely jammed, incredible interference. The storm raged with incredible, almost supernatural force. This was no ordinary desert storm, which sometimes happen in these regions. This one seemed localized, centered around the ruins like a living, enraged entity determined to destroy us at all costs. Visibility dropped to 0. I could barely make out Thunder's silhouette, standing a couple of meters away. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, tearing stones and sand from the ruined walls. Staying in the open was tantamount to suicide. "Cover! Find cover! Fast!" Doc ordered. We huddled together and, almost by feel, moved deeper into the nearest half-ruined structure. The walls offered some protection from the wind's fury, but sand penetrated everywhere. It choked our airways, crunched on our teeth, got into the mechanisms of our weapons. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing swirling clouds of sand and trembling shadows. I felt fear, primal and sticky, clutching my throat. This wasn't just a natural element. This was the wrath of the desert itself, or something that inhabited these ruins and did not want our presence. We found ourselves in a large hall with a partially collapsed ceiling. The wind howled through the breaches, creating a chilling, otherworldly music. Sand rained down from above as if someone was deliberately sifting it onto us. Breathing became increasingly difficult. I coughed, feeling the fine grains scratching my throat. "We won't last long here," Doc said, his voice barely audible through the storm's roar. "Need to find something more solid, deeper. The Chimera signal is still leading further into the city." We had no choice. Staying here meant being buried alive. We had to move, push through this elemental fury, into the very heart of the dead city, which seemed to have come alive and decided to show us its true, nightmarish face. The breath of antiquity had turned into a deadly storm, and we were just pathetic grains of sand in its path. The storm didn't abate. Its furious howl penetrated the ancient walls, echoed in the half-ruined halls and corridors, mixing with the creak of settling stones and the rustle of omnipresent sand. We advanced deeper into the ruins, seeking refuge from this primal wrath. But each step only compounded the feeling that we were delving into something alien and hostile. The lights on our helmets cut through the gloom, revealing collapsed vaults, cracked walls with remnants of frescoes where the same nightmarish figures with jackal heads were discernible, and gaping black voids leading into the unknown. Sand crunched under our boots, creating the illusion that someone invisible was following us closely, their heavy steps echoing in our ears. Occasionally, the wind howling in narrow passages and cracks in the walls formed a chilling cacophony, resembling moans or a distant, tormented weeping. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Sparky, despite the hellish conditions, managed to check his device. The Chimera beacon signal became clearer, leading us through the labyrinth of ruined buildings towards what seemed to be the central part of the city. Here, the structures were more massive, better preserved, as if some unknown force had protected them from the destructive breath of time and sand. And here, as Sparky had said, the radiation background was noticeably higher. Not enough to cause immediate radiation sickness, but enough to cause an unpleasant tingling on the skin and slight nausea. The dosimeters on our wrists quietly chirped, confirming his words. "We're almost there," Sparky rasped, shouting over another gust of wind that tore through a breach in the wall. "The signal source and maximum radiation level, straight ahead, maybe 100 meters, no more." We emerged onto what was probably once the city's main square. Even through the veil of the sandstorm, its immense size was discernible. In the center of the square, like an ominous idol, stood something resembling a huge well or altar, constructed of dark, almost black stones. Above it, resting on massive stone supports, hung a gigantic stone wheel covered in weathered but still visible runes. These runes were unlike any ancient language I knew. They were angular, sharp, as if scratched by the claws of some monstrous creature. And it was from this well altar that the strongest radiation background and the steady Chimera signal emanated. But that wasn't what caught our attention first. In the dim light of our flashlights, piercing through the swirling sand, we saw them. Several bodies, scattered around the altar. These were the bandits we had been tracking. Judging by the remnants of their gear, Kalashnikovs, vests, a couple of RPGs. They were the ones who had breached the Globemaster and dragged the Chimera here. And here, a horrifying fate had befallen them. We approached cautiously. The sight was nauseating. The bodies were desiccated to the point of mummies. The skin, stretched taut over bones, was thin as parchment and had a grayish-yellow hue. Eyes had sunken into their sockets, becoming dark, lifeless holes. Mouths were wide open in silent screams of terror. Around them lay spent automatic rifle casings, many casings. They had fought back, desperately to the last bullet. But against whom? Or what? There were no bullet or shrapnel wounds on their clothing or gear. There were no traces of blood either, as if all life, all moisture had simply been drained from them. "Bandits," Doc said grimly, examining one of the bodies. "Looks like they breached the Globemaster and dragged Chimera here. But what happened to them?" Beside the bodies lay several empty canvas bags and remnants of some tools, an oxyacetylene torch, crowbars. Tracks in the sand, not yet completely erased by the storm, indicated they had dragged something heavy from the edge of the square to this very altar. Probably the Chimera container. "Look," Reaper pointed to the hand of one of the withered corpses. There were strange marks on it, resembling burns or ulcers, but without signs of charring. The skin in these places was as if thinned, almost transparent. Whatever this is, it doesn't just kill. It drains. A shudder ran through me. It was becoming crystal clear. Something lethally dangerous dwelled in these ruins, something capable of turning a healthy, armed man into a withered mummy in a matter of minutes. And this something, it seemed, had been attracted by the Chimera, or disturbed by its appearance here. Thunder spat on the sand. "So these bastards dragged that crap here, and the local unholy things welcomed them for it. Serves them right." His voice was rough, but it held a note of poorly concealed fear. Even his skepticism seemed to be cracking in the face of such a horrifying and inexplicable death. "Chimera is likely inside that well," Doc said, pointing to the ominous structure in the center. "And it seems its presence here has awakened something that has slept for centuries. We need to retrieve the cargo and get the hell out of here as fast as possible, before we join this company." The storm outside continued to howl, not weakening in the least. We were trapped. Trapped in an ancient, cursed city where death takes the most gruesome and inexplicable forms, and in the center of it all, the mysterious Chimera, radiating radiation and attracting unknown evil. I looked at the stone wheel above the well. The runes on it seemed to pulsate in the uneven light of our flashlights, as if mocking us. And from the well itself came a faint, nauseating smell. A mix of dust, decay, and something else. Something metallic, yet organic. The smell of an ancient tomb that would have been better left undisturbed. "Sparky, what do you say?" Doc turned to our tech, who, oblivious to the howling storm and the horrific findings, was already fiddling with sensors near the well altar. "Can we safely extract the container?" Sparky looked up from his instruments, his face pale in the light of his headlamp, but his eyes gleamed with professional intensity mixed with alarm. "Radiation is very high directly over the opening, Commander. The container does seem to be in there at some depth. If Chimera is damaged, it could be dangerous. But the well itself, it's ancient, very ancient. And this wheel..." He pointed to the massive stone wheel above the altar. "Looks like some kind of lifting mechanism. Primitive, but possibly functional." "Then we try to lift it," Doc decided. His voice was firm, allowing no argument, although I saw his jaw clench. "Thunder Reaper, you're with me. We'll try to turn this wheel. Whisper Sparky, provide cover, and be ready for anything. Ready for anything sounded ominous. What else could be waiting for us in this cursed place, after the withered corpses and the awakened storm? My heart pounded so hard it seemed its beat drowned out the wind's howl. I took my rifle off safety, trying not to look at the empty eye sockets of the dead lying a few meters away. Thunder, the most impatient and physically strong among us, was the first to approach the stone wheel. It was enormous, no less than 2 meters in diameter, and looked incredibly heavy. The stone surface was covered with the same ominous runes as the altar itself. He gripped one of the protrusions, muscles bulging under his uniform.
"All right, old hag, budge!"
He growled and leaned on the wheel with effort. At first, nothing happened. The wheel didn't move, as if welded to its supports. Thunder cursed through clenched teeth. Reaper and Doc joined him, gripping other protrusions. They pushed together, their faces red with strain. I could hear their hoarse breathing, the creak of their gear, and then came a deafening, grating sound that sent an icy chill down my spine. The stone wheel, yielding to their combined efforts, slowly, with incredible difficulty, began to turn. The grinding was so loud that it seemed the very stones of the ruins were groaning in pain. With each centimeter of movement, a low, vibrating hum began to emanate from underground, from the depths of the well, growing louder, making the floor tremble beneath our feet. Sand and small stones rained down from the partially collapsed ceiling and walls of the hall. Suddenly, the runes on the wheel and the altar itself flared with a dull, sickly crimson light. It pulsed like a huge, malevolent heart, illuminating our strained faces and distorted, fearful shadows on the walls. The hum from the well intensified, turning into a roar that deafened our ears. The air around the altar became thick, heavy, saturated with the smell of ozone, dust, and something else, disgustingly sweetish, like rotting flesh.
"Stop!" Sparky shouted, recoiling from the well. "Something's happening!"
Pressure is dropping, energy levels are through the roof, but it was too late. From the gaping black maw of the well, as if escaping from hell itself, poured a thick, greenish mist. It rapidly filled the space around the altar, swirling and twisting like a living entity. The mist carried not only dust and spores of unknown origin, but also a palpable wave of radiation. The dosimeters on our wrists shrieked hysterically. And then, out of this poisonous mist, they began to emerge. The first creature crawled out quickly, almost silently, except for the quiet click of claws on stone. It was a humanoid figure, but its head was the head of a jackal, a long, narrow muzzle, pointed ears, yellow eyes burning in the darkness. Its body, covered in sparse, coarse, dark brown fur, was thin but wiry, with unnaturally long limbs. In its clawed hands, the creature gripped a curved, serrated blade of dull, blackened metal. Behind it, a second, a third emerged from the greenish haze. They crawled out of the well like roaches from a crack, silent, fast, and incredibly horrifying. The very creatures we had seen on the bas-reliefs.
"Fire!" Doc roared, the first to regain composure. His burst of automatic fire ripped through the silence, mixing with the storm's howl and the roar from the well. "Fire to kill!"
We opened fire. Bullets struck the creatures, tearing out clumps of fur and dark, almost black blood, but they seemed oblivious. They moved with incredible speed and bestial fury, emitting low growling and clicking sounds that chilled the blood. Their eyes burned in the darkness with primal hatred. A desperate battle began in a confined space. The jackal-headed warriors fell upon us like locusts. Their blades and bone spears, which some held, flashed in the greenish mist. I saw one of them leap at Thunder. He knocked it back with a powerful rifle butt blow, but the creature managed to slash his arm with its serrated blade. Thunder roared in pain and rage, his M240 thundering, spraying lead at the advancing monsters. Ordinary bullets were ineffective. They passed through the creature's wiry bodies, seemingly causing no lethal harm. The creatures fell but immediately rose, or new ones arrived to take their place. I saw Reaper, having discarded his sniper rifle, which was useless at this range, pull out a pistol and a shotgun, firing almost point blank. Sparky, taking cover behind the remnants of a column, fired his rifle, his face contorted in horror, but he kept fighting. One of the creatures lunged at me. Its yellow eyes gleamed in the gloom, saliva dripping from its maw. I fired several shots, aiming for its head. The bullets hit, but the creature just shook its head and kept coming. Its clawed paw lashed out at my face. I barely managed to recoil, feeling sharp claws scratch my helmet. The next second, its blade slashed my left forearm, where my plate carrier didn't protect. A sharp, searing pain shot through my arm, as if it had been plunged into acid. Simultaneously, I felt a sudden weakness, dizziness, as if not just blood, but life force itself, moisture, was draining from the wound. "Grenades!" Doc shouted. "Use grenades!" Several frag grenades thrown into the thick of the attacking creatures exploded with a deafening roar. The blasts scattered several jackal-headed creatures, tearing off limbs and scattering their black, smoking remains across the hall. This gave us a brief respite. Thunder's heavy weapon was also inflicting significant damage, tearing their bodies apart. But they kept crawling and crawling out of the cursed well, shrouded in poisonous green mist. There were too many of them. We were already taking casualties. I saw one of the extra soldiers attached to our unit fall, clutching his throat from which dark blood gushed, while a jackal-headed creature was already writhing beside him, biting into his neck. It was hell. Real bloody hell, awakened from the depths of centuries, and we were right in its center. Just when we thought the first, most furious wave of jackal-headed warriors had finally been repelled, and there was some confusion in their ranks. A sound came from the depths of the well that made my hair stand on end and my heart skip a beat. It was a howl. Long, soul-chilling, full of such primal rage and power that it seemed to penetrate under the skin, into the very bones. It was unlike any animal roar I knew. It contained echoes of an ancient, incomprehensible force, 1,000-year hunger, and an insatiable thirst. Simultaneously with this howl, the ground beneath our feet shook even more violently than before. The stone blocks of the walls cracked. Large chunks fell from the ceiling. The greenish glow swirling above the well flared with new intensity, and from its gaping maw burst a column of dust, spores, and that same poisonous mist, rising almost to the ceiling of the ruined hall. The jackal-headed creatures, which had continued their attacks just moments before, suddenly froze, and then, as if on command, retreated a few steps, bowing their heads as if awaiting their master. And he appeared. Slowly, with truly regal majesty, a figure began to rise from the clouds of green smoke and dust. First, a massive head covered in matted fur with a long, narrow muzzle and eyes burning like two red-hot coals in the darkness became visible. Then mighty shoulders covered in scars that looked like ritual patterns. And finally, he stood before us in all his nightmarish splendor. It was a creature vaguely resembling a huge wolf or a werewolf, but far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Standing nearly 10 feet tall, it balanced on powerful hind legs, its claws long and sharp as sickles. Its muscular but withered body was covered in thick, coarse fur, the color of dried blood mixed with desert sand. On its skin, where the fur was sparser, ancient deep scars were visible, forming some sinister symbols. From its enormous maw, full of long, needle-like teeth, dripped thick, phosphorescent saliva, hissing as it hit the stone floor. But the most terrifying thing was its eyes. They burned with an infernal, intelligent flame. There was no animal rage in them, only cold, calculated cruelty and boundless, all-consuming hatred. This was not just a beast. This was something ancient, perhaps the deity of this forgotten civilization or its avatar, the embodiment of primal fury, hunger, and death itself. That very wolf-like monster from the bas-reliefs. The creature emitted a low, rumbling growl that made even the stone walls tremble. With one incredible leap, it covered the distance, separating us, and landed among us. Its movements were swift, almost imperceptible to the eye, yet full of a chilling, predatory grace. First in its path was Thunder. Our giant, just recovered from the wound inflicted by the jackalhead, roared and pointed the barrel of his M240 at the monster. But he didn't get a shot off. The wolf of the desert's massive clawed paw flashed through the air, and the machine gun's steel receiver was crumpled as if made of foil. The next second, the claws ripped Thunder's plate carrier as if it were paper and plunged deep into his flesh. Thunder let out a horrible, gurgling scream and fell to his knees, blood gushing from his chest. "Thunder!" Doc yelled, rushing towards him, but the wolf had already tossed our heavy gunner aside like a broken doll. Thunder hit the wall and lay motionless, his eyes wide open and empty. The monster turned, its burning eyes fixing on us. Each of its breaths was accompanied by a quiet whistle, and each exhale by a wave of desiccating heat that stole our breath. It moved slowly towards us, pushing the survivors, me, Doc, Sparky, and Reaper, to the edge of the ruined hall, cutting off our path to the well and possible cover deeper in the ruins. The jackal-headed warriors, as if receiving a silent command, began to move again, encircling us in a semicircle, allowing no retreat. We opened fire with everything we had. Bullets struck its withered hide, leaving only small dents or ricocheting off with sparks. It seemed invulnerable. One of Doc's bursts hit its shoulder, tearing off a clump of fur and leaving a bleeding wound from which a dark, thick fluid like tar flowed. The monster roared, but it seemed only to enrage it further. It's a guardian, Sparky rasped, his face white as a sheet. It protects this place and Chimera. Doc understood it at the same moment. This wolf of the desert wasn't just another monster. It was the master of this cursed city, its ancient guardian, and it had no intention of letting us leave alive. Its intelligent, malice-filled eyes left no doubt about that. And outside, as if obeying its invisible will, the sandstorm howled with new, redoubled force. The wind pounded the walls with such fury that it seemed they would collapse at any moment. Sand penetrated even here, deep within the ruins, stinging our eyes and choking our lungs. The circle around us tightened. We were trapped in this ancient crypt, with its monstrous inhabitant and its minions. There was no hope of rescue left. The situation was desperate. Thunder lay motionless by the wall, his chest soaked in blood. 2 more of our guys from the reinforcement group were dead, torn apart by the jackal-headed creatures or the wolf itself. We had less and less ammo. Rifle magazines emptied with terrifying speed. Reaper, leaning his back against a half-ruined column, fired his shotgun, each shot kicking him back. But the jackalheads kept coming, their yellow eyes burning in the gloom. Sparky, wounded in the leg, tried to reload his rifle with trembling hands, his face contorted with pain and fear. Doc, covering us, fired in short, aimed bursts, conserving ammunition, but even his composure couldn't change the odds. We were outnumbered, wounded, almost out of ammo, surrounded by a horde of bloodthirsty creatures and their monstrous lord. There would be no evacuation. The storm outside roared like a wounded beast, drowning out any signals, and who would fly in to get us in this cursed place, even if we could contact base? We were alone. Doomed. Commander? Sparky rasped, wincing in pain. If the source of all this is the well and Chimera is inside it, maybe if we destroy it? The idea was insane. But in our situation, any idea, even the most insane, offering a glimmer of a chance, seemed like salvation. Chimera, it seemed, wasn't just radiating. It was acting as a catalyst, amplifying the ancient curse dormant in these ruins. If we destroyed it and the well itself, perhaps it would stop the nightmare, or at least we'd take these creatures with us. Doc thought for a moment, his face grim. Then he nodded. It's our only chance. Sparky, you got any charges left? 2 C4, Commander. Sparky patted the pouch on his side. And a couple of detonators, enough to blow this altar to Kingdom Come. Then do it, Doc ordered. Reaper, whisper cover Sparky. We need to break through to the well. It was almost suicide. The wolf of the desert seemed to understand our intentions. It let out a furious roar and lunged forward again, its claws flashing in the dim light. The jackal-headed creatures, as if on command, intensified their attack. The final, desperate push began. Doc and Reaper laid down suppressive fire, creating a barrage. I fired without aiming, just spraying lead at the attacking monsters, trying to buy Sparky precious seconds. Sparky, limping and wincing in pain, bolted towards the altar, dodging claws and blades. The wolf of the desert was unstoppable. It tore through our fire screen, batting Reaper aside with a powerful paw. Reaper flew back to the wall, his shotgun falling from his hands. The creature turned to me, its burning eyes fixed on me. I felt the icy cold of terror paralyzing my will. I saw its bared maw, fangs dripping with saliva. Suddenly, Thunder, whom we thought was dead, stirred. He struggled to his knees, his face pale, but his eyes burned with inhuman resolve. In his hand, he clutched his huge combat knife. With a wild, desperate cry, he threw himself at the wolf of the desert from behind, plunging the knife into its side, where it was already wounded by the machine gun burst. The monster howled in pain and fury, turned, and grabbed Thunder with its clawed paw. I heard the crunch of bones. But Thunder didn't let go. He clung to the creature like a bulldog, preventing it from reaching Sparky, who was already placing the charges on the altar. "Go!" Thunder gasped, his voice full of pain, but also some terrible final fury. "I'll hold him. Blow this stuff up." Doc lunged at Sparky, helping him secure the last charge and set the timer. I saw the wolf of the desert tearing Thunder apart, but our comrade made no sound, only gripping the hilt of the knife buried in the monster's flesh. It was a last, hopeless struggle, but it gave us the few precious seconds we needed. "Ready!" Sparky yelled. 10 seconds! Fall back! Move! Doc commanded. We scrambled away from the altar, stumbling over stones and bodies. Reaper, badly wounded but alive, leaned on Doc. I ran last, not looking back, but I heard the furious roar of the wolf of the desert and Thunder's dying gurgle behind me. The timer on the detonator counted down the last seconds. 5, 4, 3... We burst out of the hall, ducking into some narrow passage. hoping it would lead us away from the epicenter. 2, 1. A deafening, unimaginable explosion shook the ancient ruins to their foundations. The ground beneath us heaved as if alive. We were thrown onto the stone floor, buried in dust and small debris. The air filled with the roar of collapsing walls, and the smell of burnt stone and something else, acrid and nauseating. The furious howl of the wolf of the desert, which had echoed behind us moments ago, abruptly cut off, drowned out in that hellish roar. When the dust settled and the last echoes of the blast died down, we slowly got to our feet. Of the entire ghost squad, only 3 survived: Doc, Reaper, and I, Whisper. Reaper was severely wounded, his arm hung limply, and a large bloodstain spread across his side. Doc, despite being concussed and covered in scrapes, was on his feet, his face smeared with soot and blood, but his gaze remained steady. I felt a dull, throbbing pain spreading through my arm, from that same wound inflicted by the jackal-headed creature's claws, and my head pounded as if someone was using a jackhammer inside it. We were utterly exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, but alive. It seemed like a miracle. The strangest thing was that the sandstorm, which had battered the ruins for hours, subsided as suddenly as it had begun. The wind died down, and a faint pre-dawn light began to pierce through the breaches in the walls. We cautiously emerged from our hiding place. The sight that greeted our eyes was horrifying. The central square where the cursed altar well had stood was completely destroyed. A huge crater smoked where the well had been. Remnants of the stone wheel and the black melted stones of the altar lay scattered around. There was no trace of the well itself. It was buried under tons of blasted rock. Everything inside it, including, presumably, the chimera container, was annihilated. There were no signs of the jackal-headed warriors or the wolf of the desert. They seemed to have simply vanished along with their infernal master and the source of his power. The air was clear of the greenish mist and the smell of decay. The radiation background, according to Sparky's salvaged dosimeter that Doc picked up, had dropped to normal, natural levels. A crimson, almost bloody sun rose, illuminating the scorched ruins and the silent desert around them. It was dawn, but it brought no joy, only the bitter realization of the price we had paid. Thunder, Sparky, the other guys, they were left here forever, in these cursed sands. Doc, limping, approached the edge of the crater. He stared down for a long time at the spot where the maw of hell had gaped moments ago. Then he turned to me and Reaper. "The cargo seems to be destroyed, along with the source of that nightmare. They are gone." There was no relief or satisfaction in his voice, only infinite weariness. We were lucky. Among the debris of our gear, we found Sparky's radio, damaged but still working. After several hours of desperate attempts, Doc managed to contact base and transmit our coordinates and distress signal. We were told to wait. The main forces Doc had mentioned were still too far away to provide quick assistance. The wait was excruciating. We sat among the ruins, listening to every rustle, flinching at every shadow. The Rub al-Khali desert looked calm and lifeless again, as if nothing had happened. But we knew the truth. We knew what nightmares could lurk beneath these eternal sands, what ancient secrets they held. The rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon only around noon. Its approaching roar was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. A long journey home awaited us, long treatment, not only for physical wounds but also for mental ones. The scars on my forearm healed, but the phantom pain and the sensation of that icy touch would return now and then at night, along with the nightmares, in which I saw the burning eyes of the wolf of the desert and the withered faces of the bandits again. What exactly was Chimera? We never found out. Perhaps some ancient artifact, accidentally found and misused. Perhaps something that was itself the key to awakening ancient evil. Its exact fate remained unknown, but I wanted to believe it was destroyed forever. Sometimes, looking at the night sky, I think of Rub al-Khali. The desert is calm again, but somewhere out there, beneath its endless sands, other ancient secrets may still lie hidden, other wells of oblivion, waiting for their time to once again unleash their horror. And that thought still sends chills down my spine. We destroyed only one of them. But how many more are there? And who will be the next to hear the call of the desert?